My name is Connie, and at 58 years old, I thought I had seen enough storms to weather any crisis. But nothing could have prepared me for the night that tornado ripped through our small Missouri town, taking with it not just my home of 30 years, but everything I thought I knew about family. Standing in what used to be my living room, staring at the pile of splintered wood that once held my most precious memories, I felt lost. The oak tree Robert planted when David was born lay uprooted across our driveway, and pieces of our wedding china sparkled like broken dreams in the morning sun. But I wasn't worried. Not really. After all, I had raised a good son who would surely open his doors to his mother in her darkest hour. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to learn a hard lesson about family loyalty. And now let me take you back to the day I discovered that sometimes the people who owe you the most are the quickest to forget your sacrifices. 29 years ago, Robert and I bought that little two-story house on Maple Street with dreams bigger than our bank account. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch that needed painting every few years. But inside those walls, we built something beautiful. The kitchen always smelled like fresh-baked cornbread, and Robert's workshop in the garage was where he taught David how to use his hands to fix things instead of throwing them away. Those were simpler times when Sunday dinners lasted for hours and David would curl up next to me on the couch telling me about his day at school. Robert was the kind of man who believed in working with his hands and treating people right. Every evening after his shift at the factory, he'd come home dirty and tired, but he always had energy for David. They'd spend hours in the backyard, Robert teaching our boy how to throw a baseball or showing him which vegetables were ready for harvest in our little garden. When David turned 16 and wanted to learn to drive, Robert spent every weekend in that old pickup truck patiently explaining the rules of the road. I used to watch them from the kitchen window, my heart full, thinking how lucky I was to have two good men in my life. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. 8 years ago, Robert collapsed in the garage while working on David's car. The doctor said his heart just gave out, that there was nothing anyone could have done. At 50, I found myself completely alone for the first time in my adult life. David was already 26, then living in the city with his new wife, Amanda, building his own life. I understood that was natural, even healthy. What I didn't understand was how quickly the phone calls would become shorter, the visits less frequent until I felt like a stranger in my own son's life. After Robert died, I had to figure out how to survive on my own. The life insurance helped, but it wasn't enough to live comfortably without working. So I took a job at the county library during the day, checking out books and helping elderly patrons with their research. 3 nights a week, I cleaned offices downtown, mopping floors and emptying trash cans until well past midnight. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid the bills. More importantly, it paid for David's final year of college. When he graduated with his business degree, I was so proud I cried during the entire ceremony. Looking back now, I realize that was when things started to change between us. Success has a way of making people forget where they came from. David got his first job at a marketing firm, married Amanda in a beautiful ceremony that cost me my mother's pearl necklace to help pay for, and bought that gorgeous house in Willowbrook Estates. I was happy for him. Truly, I was. When he asked me to co-sign the mortgage because his credit wasn't quite good enough yet, I didn't hesitate. When Amanda got pregnant with Emma and needed help with childcare, I drove 40 minutes each way 3 days a week to babysit my granddaughter. Later, when Tyler came along, I was there for him too. The night of the tornado started like any other. I had just finished dinner and was settling in to watch my evening programs when the sirens began wailing. Living in Missouri, you learn to take tornado warnings seriously, so I grabbed my emergency bag and headed straight for the basement. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, like a freight train mixed with the screams of 1,000 angry spirits. The house shook so violently that I was sure it would collapse on top of me. I prayed harder that night than I had since Robert's funeral, clutching the family photos I'd managed to grab on my way downstairs. When the noise finally stopped, I waited another hour before venturing upstairs. What I found broke my heart in ways I couldn't have imagined. The tornado had sheared off most of the roof, and the second floor had collapsed into what used to be our living room. 30 years of memories were scattered across the yard like confetti. I found pieces of David's baby pictures stuck to the neighbor's fence, and Robert's favorite coffee mug was somehow lodged in the branches of a tree 2 houses down. Everything we had built together was gone, reduced to splinters and debris. Standing in that destruction, shivering in my nightgown, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. But I wasn't completely alone in the world. I had David. My son would take care of me just like I had taken care of him all those years. With shaking hands, I dialed his number. The phone rang 4 times before David answered, and I could hear the chaos of his household in the background. Emma was crying, and Tyler was shouting about something, and Amanda was trying to calm them both down. When David finally said hello, his voice sounded distracted and irritated. I tried to explain what had happened as clearly as possible, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. "Oh, Mom, that's terrible. Are you hurt?" he asked, but before I could finish explaining that I was physically fine but emotionally devastated, he was already moving on. "Good. Look, we're dealing with some stuff here too. Emma has a fever and Tyler's acting up. Can you maybe stay at a hotel tonight? We'll figure something out tomorrow." A hotel. My son was suggesting I spend the night in a hotel after losing everything I owned. I had helped him through college, co-signed his mortgage, babysat his children for years, and when disaster struck my life, his first thought was to send me to a Motel 6. But I didn't argue. I told myself he was just overwhelmed, that he couldn't think clearly with sick children and a stressed wife. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would remember that I was his mother, and that family takes care of family. I spent that first night sleeping in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, using my coat as a blanket and my purse as a pillow. Every few hours, I'd wake up when another customer slammed their car door, and for a moment, I'd forget where I was. Then, reality would crash over me again, like a cold wave. My home was gone, my security was gone, and my son had told me to find a hotel. The next morning, I drove to David's house with a small bag of clothes that I'd managed to salvage from the wreckage. The house looked exactly the same as it had the last time I visited, pristine and perfect with its manicured lawn and matching shutters. I remembered the day David and Amanda had shown it to me, how proud they were of their 4-bedroom colonial with the 2-car garage and the upgraded kitchen. I had been proud too, even though a part of me wondered how they could afford such an expensive place on David's salary. Amanda answered the door wearing her yoga pants and an expression that could have frozen water. She didn't invite me in right away, just stood there looking uncomfortable while I explained that I needed a place to stay while I figured out what to do next. Finally, she stepped aside and let me into the foyer, but her body language made it clear that I wasn't welcome. "David's at work," she said, not meeting my eyes. "He's really stressed lately with everything going on at his job. The kids are having a hard time adjusting to their new schedules, and my mother might be coming to help out next week." Her mother might be coming to help. I wanted to ask what exactly her mother would be helping with, since I was the one who had been providing free childcare for years. Instead, I just nodded and asked if I could sit down. Amanda showed me to the living room, the same room where I had spent countless hours playing with my grandchildren, reading them stories and teaching Emma how to tie her shoes. When David came home that evening, he looked tired and annoyed. He gave me a quick hug, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. We sat at the kitchen table while Amanda fed the children in the next room, and I tried to explain my situation more thoroughly. I told him about the insurance company, about the adjuster who wouldn't be able to assess the damage for another week, about how I had nowhere else to go. "Mom, I know this is hard," he said, running his hands through his hair, "but we really need our space right now. The kids are having a difficult time adjusting, and Amanda's mother might be coming to help." There it was again, the mention of Amanda's mother. I wanted to remind him that I was his mother, that I had given up years of my life to help raise his children. Instead, I asked if I could sleep on their couch just until I could make other arrangements. David looked toward the living room where Amanda was getting the children ready for bed, then back at me. "Just for tonight," he said. "We'll figure something else out tomorrow." That night, I lay on the same couch I had bought them as a housewarming gift, listening to the sounds of their normal family life continuing around me. I could hear David and Amanda talking in low voices in their bedroom, and I knew they were discussing me. The cushions were uncomfortable, but not nearly as uncomfortable as the growing realization that my own son saw me as a burden. The next few days followed the same pattern. I would wake up early, fold my blanket, and try to stay out of the way while the family went through their morning routine. Amanda would make breakfast for David and the children, but never asked if I wanted any. David would leave for work without really acknowledging my presence, and I would spend the day feeling like a ghost in a house that my own money had helped purchase. On the third day, I overheard Amanda talking to her neighbor while I was sitting in the backyard with Tyler. They were standing by the fence, and Amanda clearly didn't realize her voice was carrying. "Having your mother-in-law around 24/7 is exhausting," Amanda was saying. "The kids are confused about the routine, and I can't relax in my own home. Every time I turn around, she's there watching everything I do." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. This was the same woman whose children I had cared for 3 days a week for years, whose house I had helped them afford, whose family I had welcomed with open arms. Now I was being described like some kind of parasite who had invaded their perfect life. That evening, I tried to talk to David about my housing options. I had spoken with my insurance agent, and they estimated it would take at least 6 months to settle my claim and start rebuilding. I needed somewhere to stay during that time, and I hoped my son would step up and offer me a real place in his home. Instead, David seemed more agitated than ever. "Mom, I've been thinking about this, and Amanda and I have been talking. We think it would be better if you found other arrangements. Maybe there's a senior community or something. There are programs for people in your situation." Programs for people in my situation. As if I were some kind of charity case instead of his mother. As if I hadn't sacrificed everything to give him the best life possible. I wanted to remind him about the time he called me at 2 in the morning when Emma was a baby, crying because he didn't know how to calm her down. I had driven across town in my nightgown to help him. I wanted to remind him about the $5,000 I had given him just 6 months ago when his marketing firm was going through layoffs, and he was worried about making his mortgage payment. But I didn't say any of those things. Instead, I asked him how much time I had to find somewhere else to go. He looked relieved that I wasn't going to fight him on it. "Maybe by the end of the week," he suggested. "That gives you a few days to look into options." I spent the next day making phone calls and visiting potential apartments. The senior communities he had mentioned all had waiting lists, and the apartments I could afford on my limited income were in neighborhoods that weren't safe for a woman my age. I was beginning to panic when I remembered the phone call I had overheard David making the night before. He had been in his office with the door closed, but his voice had carried into the hallway where I was walking to the bathroom. "I know she needs help," he was saying to someone, "but we can't have her here indefinitely. It's affecting our routine, and Amanda is getting really stressed out." That's when it hit me. I wasn't welcome in my son's home. The boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for, saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. The money I had lent him, the years of free babysitting, the co-signed mortgage, none of it mattered now that he had what he needed. I thought about my friend Patricia, who had warned me years ago that I was being too generous with David. "You're setting yourself up to be taken advantage of," she had said. "Children need to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, not rely on their parents for everything." I had dismissed her concerns, thinking she was just bitter because her own children lived far away. Now I was beginning to understand what she meant. The breaking point came on Thursday evening. I had spent the day apartment hunting with no success, and I was feeling discouraged and exhausted. When I returned to David's house, I found him and Amanda in the kitchen, talking in low voices. They stopped when they saw me, but not before I heard Amanda say, "Just can't continue like this much longer." I asked David if we could talk privately, and he reluctantly followed me into the living room. I sat down on my makeshift bed and looked at my son. Really looked at him, trying to find some trace of the boy I had raised. But all I saw was a stranger who looked uncomfortable in his own home because his mother was there. Sunday morning came with a crisp autumn chill that seemed to match the cold reception I was getting from my own family. I had made my decision during a sleepless night on the couch, but I wanted to give David one last chance to remember who I was and what I meant to him. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast table with his coffee and newspaper, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. The children were in the living room watching cartoons, and Amanda was upstairs getting ready for church. It was the perfect opportunity for an honest conversation between mother and son. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him, noting how he didn't look up from his newspaper, even though he clearly knew I was there. "David," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, "I need to know how long I can stay here. I'm 58 years old, I've lost everything I own, and I'm your mother." He finally looked up, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt in his eyes, but it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. He folded his newspaper and set it aside, then ran his hands through his hair in that nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. Mom, look, I love you, but Amanda and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if you found other arrangements. Maybe there's a senior community or assisted living place that would be perfect for you. Assisted living. He was talking about me like I was some feeble old woman who couldn't take care of herself instead of the strong, independent person who had raised him single-handedly after his father died. I had been working 2 jobs to support myself just fine until a natural disaster destroyed my home. There was nothing wrong with my mind or my ability to live independently. David, I'm not ready for assisted living, I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. I just need a temporary place to stay while I rebuild. You have 4 bedrooms in this house. Surely we can work something out. But before David could answer, Amanda appeared in the kitchen doorway holding little Emma on her hip. She was dressed for church in a pretty blue dress that I recognized as one I had bought her for Christmas the year before. The irony wasn't lost on me. It's not personal, Connie, Amanda said, not quite meeting my eyes. We just need our privacy back. The children are getting confused about having someone else here all the time, and it's disrupting our family routine. Our family routine. As if I wasn't family. As if I hadn't been part of their routine for years when they needed free babysitting. I looked at Emma, my granddaughter, who used to run to me with her arms outstretched whenever I walked through their door. Now she just stared at me with the innocent confusion of a child who sensed tension but couldn't understand it. There are programs for people in your situation, Mom, David added, echoing what he'd said before. Government assistance, senior housing. You'll be fine. You're stronger than you think. I almost laughed at that. He was right that I was stronger than he thought, but not in the way he meant. I was strong enough to survive his rejection. I was strong enough to rebuild my life without his help. And I was strong enough to make sure he learned the true cost of turning his back on family. Standing up from the table, I looked around the kitchen one more time. The granite countertops I had helped pay for the stainless steel appliances they had bought with money. I had lent them the family photos on the refrigerator that included pictures of me with the grandchildren. All of it felt foreign now, like I was seeing someone else's life. I understand, I said quietly. I'll pack my things and be out of your way. The relief on David's face was unmistakable, and that hurt more than anything else he had said or done. My own son was relieved to be getting rid of me. Amanda actually smiled, probably thinking about how she could rearrange the living room furniture now that the couch wouldn't need to serve as someone's bed. Thanks for being understanding, Mom, David said, already reaching for his newspaper again. I knew you'd figure something out. You always do. But as I walked upstairs to gather my few belongings, I was already forming a plan that would teach my son exactly what figuring something out really meant. Moving into my new apartment was easier than I had expected, probably because I had so few possessions left to move. The one-bedroom place wasn't much, but it was clean and safe, and most importantly, it was mine. No one could tell me I needed to find other arrangements or that my presence was disrupting their routine. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe freely. But breathing freely wasn't enough. I had spent too many years sacrificing for David, giving him everything he needed to build his perfect life, only to be discarded like yesterday's newspaper when he no longer needed me. It was time for him to learn that actions have consequences and that the people who love you the most can also hurt you the most when you take their love for granted. My first call was to Robert Harrison, an attorney who had handled some legal work for me when Robert died. I explained my situation and asked him to prepare a formal demand for repayment of the $15,000 David had borrowed from me the previous year. He had promised it was temporary, a short-term loan to help with a business investment that would pay me back with interest. 11 months later, he had never mentioned the money again. Mrs. Patterson, Robert Harrison said, do you have documentation of this loan? I did indeed. Unlike my son, I believed in putting financial agreements in writing, even between family members. David had signed a promissory note agreeing to repay the money within 12 months. That deadline had passed 2 months ago without so much as an acknowledgement from him. Send the demand letter, I told the attorney. I want my money back. My second call was to my financial advisor, Martha Chen, who had been helping me manage my savings since Robert died. I had been conservative with my investments, keeping most of my money in low-risk accounts that provided steady but modest returns. But at 58, I realized I didn't need to be quite so cautious anymore. "Martha, I want to make some changes to my investment strategy," I said, "and I need to update my will." Within a week, I had moved my money into higher yield investments and completely revised my estate planning. David's name was removed from everything. Instead, my assets would go to the local animal shelter where I had volunteered before Robert got sick and to a scholarship fund for single mothers trying to finish their education. If David wanted an inheritance, he could earn it by learning how to treat family with respect. The third change I made was more subtle but equally important. For 3 years, I had provided free childcare for Emma and Tyler every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday while Amanda worked part-time at a dental office. I had never asked for payment, never complained when the children were sick or difficult, never missed a day even when I wasn't feeling well myself. That arrangement ended immediately. When Amanda called to confirm my schedule for the following week, I politely explained that I was no longer available for babysitting. "What do you mean, not available?" Amanda asked, sounding genuinely confused. "I mean, I won't be watching the children anymore," I said calmly. "You'll need to make other arrangements." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Amanda spoke again, her voice higher and more strained than usual. "But, Connie, I have to work. I can't afford to put both kids in daycare, and David's job doesn't provide enough income for me to stay home full-time." That wasn't my problem anymore. For years, I had been subsidizing their lifestyle by providing free childcare, allowing Amanda to work and contribute to their household income, while David pursued his career goals. Now, they would have to figure out how to manage like every other family with two working parents. "I'm sure you'll work something out," I said, using the same dismissive phrase David had used when he told me to find other living arrangements. "You're stronger than you think." The consequences of my decisions began to unfold more quickly than I had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, I received a frantic call from David. His voice was tight with stress, and I could hear Amanda arguing with the children in the background. "Mom, what's this about a demand letter?" he asked without any preamble. "Robert Harrison sent me some legal document saying you want me to pay back $15,000 immediately." I explained calmly that the money had been a loan with a specific repayment date, and that date had passed. I needed the money to help cover my living expenses while I rebuilt my life after the tornado. It was perfectly reasonable for me to expect repayment of a legitimate debt. "But Mom, I thought that was just family helping family," David said. "I didn't realize you were going to treat it like some kind of business transaction." The irony was incredible. When he needed help, it was family helping family. But when I needed help, I was told to find government assistance and senior housing. I reminded him that he had signed a promissory note making it a legal obligation, not a family favor. "I don't have $15,000 just sitting around," he said. "We're barely making ends meet as it is, especially now that Amanda had to cut back her hours at work because we can't find affordable childcare." That was the moment I realized my plan was working exactly as I had hoped. David was finally experiencing what it felt like to struggle financially without family support. He was learning that actions have consequences and that burning bridges with the people who love you most can leave you isolated when you need help the most. "You'll figure something out," I said gently. "You always do." The situation got worse for David over the next few months. Amanda was forced to quit her job entirely because daycare costs for 2 children would have eaten up most of her paycheck. Without her income, they struggled to make their mortgage payments. David's stress affected his performance at work, and he was passed over for a promotion he had been counting on. Then Amanda's car broke down, requiring expensive repairs they couldn't afford. In the past, David would have called me for help, and I would have either lent them the money or paid for the repairs myself. This time, when he called, I listened sympathetically but explained that my own financial situation was tight. I was telling the truth. Rebuilding my life after the tornado was expensive. But I also had priorities now that didn't include subsidizing my ungrateful son's lifestyle. By winter, David and Amanda were forced to put their house on the market. The same house I had co-signed for the house where I had been told I wasn't welcome during my time of need. They moved into a small apartment across town, and Amanda took a job waitressing at night to help make ends meet. This is all because you're being vindictive. David accused me during one particularly bitter phone conversation. You're punishing us because we couldn't let you live with us permanently. I corrected him gently. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply treating him the same way he had treated me, as someone who needed to solve their own problems without relying on family support. If he found this treatment unacceptable, perhaps he could understand how I had felt when he turned me away in my hour of greatest need. Mom, I made a mistake, he said finally. I should have handled things differently when you needed help. Can we talk about this? I considered his request for exactly as long as he had considered mine when I asked for a temporary shelter after losing my home. I'm sorry, David, I said. I need my privacy. The healing process wasn't immediate and it wasn't easy. For the first few months after cutting ties with David, I cried myself to sleep more nights than I care to admit. No matter how justified my actions were, it hurt to be estranged from my only child. There were moments when I questioned whether I was being too harsh, whether I should reach out and try to rebuild our relationship. But then I would remember the look of relief on his face when I agreed to leave his house, or Amanda's casual dismissal of my needs, and my resolve would strengthen. This wasn't about revenge. This was about self-respect and teaching David that love and loyalty are two-way streets. I found my salvation in unexpected places. At the community center, I joined a support group for older adults who had experienced family rejection. I wasn't alone in my situation. Margaret, a 72-year-old retired teacher, shared stories about her daughter who had moved across the country and rarely called. Frank talked about his son who only visited when he needed money. We were a small group of people who had given everything to our children, only to discover that generosity isn't always appreciated or reciprocated. The hardest part, Margaret said during one of our sessions, is learning to love yourself enough to demand better treatment. She was right. For years, I had measured my worth by how much I could do for David, how much I could sacrifice for his happiness and success. I had confused enabling with love, and it had created a relationship dynamic where I gave everything and he took everything without ever learning to appreciate the cost of my generosity. I began to rebuild my life in ways I hadn't expected. With the insurance settlement from my house, I was able to purchase a small cottage in a quiet neighborhood across town. It wasn't as large as the house Robert and I had shared, but it was perfect for my needs. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I hadn't had time for when I was working multiple jobs to support David's education. I also started volunteering at the county animal shelter, working with abandoned dogs and cats who needed patient, gentle care to learn to trust humans again. The parallel to my own situation wasn't lost on me. These animals had been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect them, and they needed time and space to heal, just like I did. Months passed, then a year. Occasionally, I would run into people who knew David and Amanda, and I would hear updates about their struggles. David had found a new job, but it paid less than his previous position. Amanda was working 2 part-time jobs to help make ends meet. They had managed to avoid foreclosure, but barely. The children were enrolled in public school now instead of the private academy they had previously attended. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, but I also felt no obligation to rescue them. They were experiencing the natural consequences of their choices, just as I was experiencing the natural consequences of mine. The difference was that my consequences included peace of mind and self-respect, while theirs included financial stress and the knowledge that they had destroyed their relationship with someone who had loved them unconditionally. On the 2nd anniversary of the tornado, I received a letter from David. It wasn't a demand for money or help, just a simple handwritten note acknowledging the mistakes he had made and expressing regret for how he had treated me during my crisis. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and he didn't make excuses for his behavior. He simply said he understood now what it felt like to struggle without family support, and he was sorry for not providing that support when I needed it most. I read the letter 3 times, then put it away in a drawer. Maybe someday I would be ready to respond, but not yet. Forgiveness is a process, not a single decision, and I wasn't ready to risk opening my heart to someone who had shown such callousness when I was most vulnerable. Instead, I focused on the life I was building for myself. I had learned to find joy in small things: morning coffee on my back porch, the satisfaction of watching rescued animals learn to trust again the companionship of friends who valued my presence instead of my wallet. I had learned that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about people who show up for you when life gets difficult. Most importantly, I had learned that respect isn't something you give automatically because someone is related to you. Respect is earned through actions and choices, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the consequence of their decisions. David needed to learn that taking advantage of someone's love doesn't mean that love is unlimited or unconditional. As I sit in my garden today watching the roses I planted bloom, for the second time, I sometimes wonder if David tells his children about the grandmother who loved them enough to teach their father what family really means. I wonder if he understands that my absence from their lives isn't punishment, but rather the natural result of choices he made when he decided his comfort mattered more than my crisis. So here's my question for all of you watching today. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between being taken advantage of and standing up for your own dignity? Have you learned the hard way that sometimes people only value what you do for them, not who you are? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below because I've discovered that we're all stronger than we think when we finally decide we're worth fighting for. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to expect the same love and respect from family that you give to them. And remember, sometimes the people who claim they can't afford to help you are the same ones who can't afford to lose you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect by the people who matter most in your life. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't measured by what you can do for others, but by how you choose to honor yourself.